All right, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Good to see everybody come out today for the halaqah, inshallah. So today we have Dr., or as I like to call him, Chaplain Khalil. And we're going to be talking, inshallah, about how did Malcolm X transform Islam in America. So as a quick background of Chaplain Khalil, he got his PhD in Islamic Law and also a master's in Middle East Studies from Columbia. And he completed traditional Islamic seminary training in Turkey as well. And actually, he has a class right now at HKS, Harvard Kennedy School, about Islam and democracy. It's a pretty good class. I'm actually in it, so I can vouch. And mashallah, a lot of students, and so is Dawood. And a lot of people, and I know Hamza's taken it in the past. I know a lot of people in that class asked some tough questions.
They did.
And the chaplain always, mashallah, is able to answer them with grace and dignity. And so, inshallah, I'll take no more of your time. If you haven't gone boba, it's outside. I think there's, from left to right, matcha, taro, strawberry, and then mango. So please feel free to grab boba. And inshallah, let's get started.
Thanks, Marine. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Oh, come on. Assalamu alaikum. There you go. There you go. Good evening. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome. Good evening, everybody. My name is, as Moeen said, Khalil Abdur-Rashid. I'm one of the Muslim chaplains here. My chaplain Sammy is behind us. She's my wife and also the second Muslim chaplain here at Harvard. So I'm really honored to be able to talk about this topic with you. So let's start off with something a little bit different, because I want this also to be like a discussion and not just like a formal, one-way street lecture. But what I'd like to do is see if we can start off for take 5 minutes just briefly. And if you guys could pair up in groups of 2 or 3 if you need to, whatever you feel comfortable with. Like, look at the person next to you. It'd be great if you pair up with somebody you don't know, or if you want to pair up in 3s, maybe somebody you know and somebody you don't know, however you feel comfortable with. And in your group for like 5 to 7 minutes, try to answer this question in your thoughts, in your minds, from your perspective. What do you think, what are the ways that Malcolm, rahimahullah, has contributed to the transformation of Islam in America, based on your knowledge, based on what you know? Everybody knows a little something about Malcolm X. And also not only from what you're aware of, not only from what we're aware of here in the States, but also abroad as well, because Malcolm has a significant reputation abroad. So let's take about 5 minutes or so. Pair up, inshallah. Go ahead, look around you, look next to you, maybe 2 people, 3 people, whatever's easiest for you. As you're doing this, if you don't know each other, please do introductions. Don't start this without getting to know each other. So just do some quick introductions. It'd be great for folks who don't know each other to pair up as well. And so if you don't know someone, do some basic introductions for a few minutes and just talk through this question amongst yourselves. Time starts now. Okay, let's come together. What are the kinds of things that came up in your conversations in your groups? Just call them out at random. What are the kinds of things, if you could summarize it in maybe 2 or 3 words, what are the kinds of things that came up? Come on. Yeah.
Well, I think from what I learned, I think like the way that like the people who followed him believed Islam was like very different from like what Islam actually is. Like they looked at it more from a perspective of like just equality. Like they didn't like because obviously there was like a lot of slavery going on, like inequality. So they looked at it from a perspective of like everyone being equal rather than like actually what Islam is. I think. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's fair.
Good. We'll come to that as well. What else? Great. What else? Yeah, bismillah.
We talked a lot, so I'll summarize the main points. One, we said like that when we think of him, we think of the conversion from the Nation of Islam after his hajj.
Right, to Sunni Islam, right.
Sunni Islam. We also said how he was framed as violent a lot, and like MLK being the peaceful version, but really he was someone who was open to both options and did what was necessary in each case.
Good, very good. Bravo, good job. What else came up? Yeah.
2 things that came out was how he, mashallah, always changed his
Yeah.
perspective. Like he, throughout, like he's like this. He thought of A, but then later on he learned something new.
Right. Evolved. Right.
He evolved
Right.
until the end of
Until the end.
his life.
Right.
And outside, another one just seeing the other side. He
Right.
tried to see other perspectives.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. Certainly true. What else? One more. Yeah.
I think the speed of his transformation, because he only transformed in the last years of his life.
Right.
It was only in the final weeks of his life that he actually fasted for Ramadan. And
Right.
it is too bad that
Right.
he died too early.
Right, right. He did, mashallah. Rahimahullah. Right, right. Excellent. So, this was the topic of my doctoral dissertation. And I share it a lot because, this is, a lot is known about Malcolm from his years in the Nation of Islam. In the last year of his life is when he, performed the Hajj, and then left the nation, traveled, performed Hajj, and then actually embarked on an incredible, phenomenal transformational journey with amazing accomplishments and visionary productions in just 9 months, or really, let's say 10 months of his life. That part of his history and his life has been severely neglected, severely underexplored, severely just lost. And so I wanted to recover that. And so part of this conversation tonight is a little eye-opener into that. And so we'll start, inshallah ta'ala, and I want this to be like a dialogue as well. And there's a lot to this story, but this is just an introduction. So Malcolm is certainly known for his activism, but the first thing is that he was much more than that. He was a true public intellectual, a visionary leader, and certainly an architect of an incredible intellectual legacy and a practical map for moral and spiritual progress. And that's what's little known about Malcolm's contribution in the last year of his life. He really pivoted to the importance of spiritual cultivation and production and of transformation of the understanding of Islam in the United States. And particularly the importance of moral and spiritual transformation for those wishing to participate in the struggle against injustice, right? He understood, he developed like an allergic reaction in his last year, and because of his experience with the Nation of Islam, he developed a real, what I call an allergy, an allergic reaction to ideology. And the detrimental impact of blindly following just ideology. And he wrote in his diary about how he deeply regretted being sort of an agent of ideological misuse and abuse, and how he blamed himself for the misguidance of the masses in the mass African American community, and felt that it was his personal obligation and duty, his moral duty, to correct the damage that he had done. And he set about a visionary process as to how to reform the understanding of Islam in America and the application, the practice of Islam in America. And he wanted to start with the African American community, but his vision was not limited to the African American community. So in my presentation tonight, you're going to see a lot of references from Malcolm about the African American community, and that's not because he was still part of the nation and only focused on the black community. It's because he felt that it was his mission to correct the damage that he had caused. And to do that, he felt that it was his primary obligation was to reform the African American community from the distortions that he felt that he had played a role in terms of the misunderstanding, the misapplication, misrepresentation of Islam. And so he wanted to start with the black community and then from there work outward. So he played a role in, this is his own words, in introducing a distorted image of Islam in America. Like he writes about this, and he really almost, is very repentant, very remorseful, and very regretful about this, even though it was not his fault. He cannot be blamed, but he took responsibility for it, interestingly enough. And because of that, he set forth a strategic vision and a practical path for how he thought Islam in America should be developed. And one of the interesting things is that some of you may know of Dr. Abdul Hakim Jackson or Dr. Sherman Jackson out of USC, University of Southern California, who's written about Islam and the Black American legacy, and he talks about this idea of a communal conversion, that the African American community in the United States engaged in what he calls, Dr. Jackson calls, a communal conversion. And this is where the whole black community essentially converts to Islam, but not from a religious point of view, from a cultural point of view. And this is where you have like a lot of hip hop and rap artists that use Islamic tropes and symbols. And even you'll find black folks in the neighborhood, like in the hood or in the inner city, that aren't Muslim, but they have Muslim names. So you'll find like a Latifa or a Bilal or a Kareem or whatever, and they may not even be Muslim. Or some, for example, their parents may be Christian, but they won't touch pork, for example, or they won't drink. Right. So the legacy of the teachings of Islam permeated the black community because of Malcolm's work to make Islam part of the culture, if you will, of the black community, even though they might be black Christians in many ways, or not affiliated with a particular religious tradition, but interested in black improvement and empowerment. So Malcolm sought, because he saw that the message of Islam was something that impacted the culture of black people in the United States, and therefore, in his time, being black also was in one way, not in all ways, but in one way synonymous with being Muslim. Certainly in America, it was very acceptable for there to be black Muslims. So he sought to reform this idea. I'll skip it. So this is a breakdown of the last year of his life. So in March 12, 1964, he announces his break with the Nation of Islam. A few days later, he established the Muslim Mosque, which is his contribution to a religious institution in New York City that he posits. He gives the task of religious reformation or reform. Here at Harvard, a few days later, he gives a talk. And his speech at Harvard is recorded, meaning not in video, obviously, but documented. And it's in this speech that he sort of outlines a part of his vision here at Harvard. He meets Dr. King and then travels abroad for many different visits and meetings and places, and he performs the Hajj pilgrimage. It's while he's abroad that he receives first copy of the Quran. It's the Yusuf Ali translation. He actually, while he travels, receives 2 different copies of the Quran, right? And so he takes this with him. He visits Al-Azhar, then he goes to Ghana, where he receives a second copy. He goes back to Cairo. And it's after that this is in August, that he goes through training in Egypt as well. He has a teacher in Egypt, and they give him a lot of intensive teachings and courses, if not courses, but education on certain principles of Islam and reading the Quran and stuff like that, right, translation. He goes back and performs another Umrah and visits parts of Africa, visits Lebanon, Beirut. And so during his travels, he's traveling with a mentor as well, and he's documenting these things. He's writing in his journal about his experiences, and he's also documenting like how his re-education of Islam and about Islam and his readings of the Quran, how that like he's digesting this stuff and how it's reforming him, how he's thinking deeply about his new ideas about Islam in America and what the Muslim community should be like and what his goals and priorities should be. Like he's writing this stuff down. And then he returns after being gone for 6 months abroad. He also receives a certificate from one of the Sheikh Al-Azhar, which grants him permission by Al-Azhar University and certifies him to literally give da'wah in America, to teach Islam at a basic level in the United States. So he actually receives, and this is not known by most people, even many Muslims don't know this, certification by Al-Azhar. And they grant him official permission with a line of teachers going back to the Prophet ﷺ to transmit Islam in the United States. Right? That's profound. He's arguably the first African American, probably the first American to receive an isnad, a chain of transmission, and permission to teach Islam. And so then he returns to the United States. He speaks, goes on a speaking tour. He also comes back having received a new name, right? And so that's when one of his teachers and mentors gives him a different name, and he's given the name Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, right? Malik. That's because his teacher that was teaching gave him the name Malik, right? And then he establishes another organization, which we'll talk about, and then he's assassinated a few months later. The Hajj, as we know, was transformative, and we talk a lot about the Hajj as a transformative vehicle for Malcolm, is also a transformative vehicle for his wife. So after he was assassinated, when he was assassinated, another little known fact is that he was scheduled to go to Hajj a second time. But when he was assassinated in front of his wife and his daughters, and his wife was pregnant with twins, the Saudi government transformed his ticket and his permission to go to Hajj, and they gave it to his wife, Aunt Betty Shabazz, Dr. Betty Shabazz. And they asked her, did you want to go? And she says, I'm close to delivery. And they said, if you want to go, you take his place and you come, and we'll afford you all of the hospitality and services and protection you need. So she decides to not to take that advantage of that, and she goes as well. So from Malcolm's Hajj experience, what he took from that was an inspiration about the importance of the unity of the Ummah community, of the Ummah, hope and enlightenment, and also a sense of brotherhood. But his sense of brotherhood was dominated by the fact that he was around, men, for example. With his wife's experience, is very different. So his wife goes to Hajj the next year, and Malcolm goes to Hajj in a state where he feels neglected and abandoned by his teacher, his mentor. He left the Nation of Islam. He feels duped by ideology, tricked. He feels a sense of betrayal, and then he discovers the beauty of Islam. His wife goes in a sense of like isolation, loneliness, and trauma, and grief, and sadness, and while she's carrying this deep spiritual burden, if you will, or emotional burden, she's also got a physical burden with her in the sense that she's many, many months pregnant. I think she was 6 months pregnant or something, and she's carrying twins. So she's got multiple burdens that she's carrying as well, and she's enduring the Hajj, thinking about the strength and the enduring legacy of Hajar, the wife of Abraham alayhi salam. And so when she's going through it, from her perspective, as she's thinking about her husband's legacy, she's thinking about the use of faith, iman, and suffering as well, and how to salvage strength from loss. And she develops an idea of the importance of staying rooted to your tradition, but also connecting with other women of color as well who have similar experiences and who have derived strength through challenges and their faith in Allah Most High. And he writes about his experience. Dr. Betty Shabazz, also writes about her experience, and her daughter does as well. So I just wanted to put that out. When he comes back before he dies, he outlines 7 critical areas of priority for Islam in America. And this is the first way that Malcolm starts to intends, because he never lived to see this through, how he intended to transform Islam in America. And he literally does this. Now, if you were to research this, like I did, you wouldn't find in his diary, for example, he says, hey, I have 7 ideas about how to do this. He does it like organically, and it comes up in different places. And he gets inspiration from the Quran, he gets inspiration from teachers, and when he gets that inspiration, it hits him, and then he writes about it. And he says, this is really important for Muslims in America, and something like I want to make this a priority, like this kind of language, So first is sincerity. Actually, this is the first thing he writes about in his diary, very interesting. He said Muslims have to be sincere. And in order for us to be effective in the community and effectuate changes, our motives, he says, have to be clear, and he wants to teach the black community about the importance of having sincere intentions. What we know to be the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that actions are by intentions, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ or بِالنِّيَّةِ, actions are by intentions. He learns that, right? He writes it down, and it's profound for him that and that's the full crumb of, and it fights, it resonates with him because he was a recipient of sinister intentions from the founder of the Nation of Islam. So he knows what immoral intentions can do. He knows the damage that can be made when you approach something with bad intentions. So for him, the beginning of the destruction of racism and structural problems and ideologies is the reforming of people, the raising of people who prioritize proper motives as to why they're doing things in the first place. And so he also recognizes this verse in the Quran, which I put up here, chapter 98, verse 5, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ. They've only been commanded to worship Allah Ta'ala sincerely, lahuddin. That's faith. Like that's the deed, that's religion. So this is the first thing, sincerity of intentions. The second thing is prayer. This is very, very interesting. So in the Nation of Islam, he didn't learn the prayer. Like Salah was not, they prayed in the nation. It's a very interesting thing. But they combined elements of the Christian prayer and the Bible with certain aspects of Islam. The prayer in the Nation of Islam was not, it was standing, but that was it. And you recited the Lord's Prayer, which is in the biblical tradition. Our Father, hallowed be thy name, etc. Right? The Lord's Prayer was what was used. So he learns the Salah, right? Malcolm learns the prayer. And he interprets, he takes the prayer and he says, the significance of the prayer as this sort of vehicle, I'm summarizing what he says, right? As this instrument, as this vehicle as a ritual, right? Both there's form and there's content. There's something externally you're doing, and there's an internal connection to Allah Ta'ala. And he found that the teaching of the prayer, that if he taught the prayer as it should be taught to the community, and he established the prayer the way it should be established in the community, that would be the external mechanism that was needed to unify the Muslims, to get them used to spiritual routines, to instill discipline in them as well, in order and to give them a certain purpose and direction. So he spoke about the importance of the prayer, something very interesting. And it doesn't matter whether you're what I call a veteran Muslim, right? Somebody who's born and raised in a Muslim country, right? Or you're a new convert to Islam. The prayer is a struggle for almost every Muslim, right? And Malcolm saw that as an example of overcoming challenges, that if you could overcome that challenge and you had that kind of discipline and that kind of purpose and that kind of tenacity, that you could do anything. Right? You could do anything. And so he used the prayer in that way. His wife, Dr. Betty Shabazz, also, rahimahullah, also focused on the prayer, interestingly enough, right? But saw it as sort of a protest, if you will, that the prayer was like a protest against the suffering and the challenges that were going on outside, that you were not going to let what happened outside of the prayer in the world stop you from your having a strong connection and strong devotion to Allah Ta'ala, to God Most High, that you weren't going to give in to suffering such that it stripped you from your devotionary connection. So you were protesting the world and its challenges and its hardships by showing up to the prayer rug, despite all the odds. Very interesting, both of their perspectives on the prayers, right? There's 7 things total. The third thing that Malcolm really talks a lot about is education. Here he meant he said education has to be modernized, he said. He used the word modernized. And he said what has to be modernized, here he meant Islamic education, but also general education, like from what we call K through 12, the way math is taught, the way history is taught, even the way languages are taught. He thought that education had to be modernized, but he first started with Islam. So he said the way that Islam is taught and represented in America has to be modernized, he said. And so the way that we talk to people about Islam and what it is, it has to use the right kind of language. What he meant by that, I'll explain it in a minute. But this first thing is that he focused on the fact that the Muslim community in America had to be the community that thought about creative ways to modernize education. He even went so far as to say we have to think differently about our schools. We have to have schools that are operated only by our community. We have to have people that devote themselves to researching new ways to teach geography, to teach science, even to teach language, to teach the sciences, to teach history, he said philosophy, even he said economics. He said all of those things have to be taught brand new in a different way, in a different mode. Like pedagogy and methodology of education has to be very different. And our Muslim American community has to be the community that does that. He writes about that prolifically, and he speaks about it. The other aspect about education, the 4 that he writes about and spoke about, is this idea of coercion. In the Quran, la ikraha fi din, ikrah, coercion. Malcolm says, and he writes this, and I'm quoting now, Islam has to be free of any and all coercive mechanisms. Very interesting. And he meant like coercive ideologically and also externally. And he says, he writes this, he said, in the end, in this context, Islam has to be made easy for people. Very interesting. I don't know if he ever came across that hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ where the Prophet said, yassiru wa la tu'assiru, make things easy for people and don't make things difficult. That's a hadith from the Prophet. Make things easy. Actually, the Prophet said, ﷺ, bashiru wa la tunaffiru first. He said, give people good news and don't stress them out. Right? Very interesting. Don't say things that turn people. Tunaffiru is to turn people off, turn people away. He said, give people good news and don't turn them away. And then he said, yassiru, make things easy for people, wala tu'assiru, and don't make things hard for people. I don't know if he came across that hadith, but certainly in his diary he writes all about the strategic benefit of presenting Islam in a way that it's an easy faith, easy for people to practice, easy for them to accept, easy for them to adopt, and easy to explain. Like, the fact that we make things complicated for people ends up being like obstacles for people to enter into a faith tradition that is made easy. He says, Islam is easy, we make it difficult. Very interesting, right? We make it difficult. And so this is a very interesting aspect to how he thought about that. Noor, did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. So this is this photo here is a picture of his teacher from Egypt, actually, when he was, and this is the teacher, the sheikh that gave him ijaz certification for da'wah. The fifth thing is he wrote about our access to power. Our meaning the American Muslim community's ability, because we're in America, he says, we have basically access to mechanisms of power and resources that many other global communities didn't. Now, he's writing this, of course, in 1964, late 1964, early 1965. So he's saying that he's projecting that in the future, the American Muslim community will grow and will have access to power, access to phenomenal opportunities. And he says basically with that opportunity to have access to material forms of wealth, access to strategic positions where we can make decisions, comes a deep moral responsibility. And he says, and I put this here, this is a quote, we must display, he says, this is exactly from his writing, his diary, we must display a balance and a harmony, he says, balance and harmony between material and spiritual progress. He said the challenge with the United States is that they have access to material progress, but they have no moral compass, essentially. He said, as American Muslims, we're the ones who have to be basically the moral spirit, the moral compass of this country. And if we don't do that, no one will. Like, who will do that, right? If we don't take up that mantra, who's going to do that? So this is a very profound statement by Malcolm, actually. And he writes about it. You can tell he believes it. Like, he envisions a community that has access to power and authority, and that will have it. Not in his time, but that will have it. And he says, if we play our cards right, basically, these are my words, if we do the right thing, then we can become this paradigmatic example of how to use power the proper way and how to not abuse it. And we'll be like a check inside the U.S. This is a very profound statement. Number 6, somebody talked about equality. He also writes about equality. He says that Islam in America has to demonstrate that Islam stands for equality of all people, and by all people, he means everybody on the planet, interestingly enough. He was very universal in this statement. And that the fellowship and equality between men and women and all people around the world, that's what we stand for, the equality of all people before God. So he really transcended his previous belief system, and he took his connectedness to the global struggle of people that are marginalized and oppressed. And what he said was, as an American Muslim community, we have to understand there is no basic idea of American exceptionalism. That because we're American, and certainly because we're black, because in the Nation of Islam there was this idea of black superiority, right, etc. So this idea of superiority is corrosive and destructive, right? And it's what inserts divisions. So he said the key to that is teaching that we are all people are equal. We are equal to everybody. And therefore, one group of people does not deserve more rights or more access or better this or better that to the detriment of another people. And as American Muslims, we're the ones that basically have to, in a nutshell, preach this, right? Propagate this, convey this, live this, believe this, right? Finally, in terms of these 7 principles, he was very clear that there have to be 2 fronts to how we operate as a community. There's got to be the material front, which is education, the accumulation of wealth, access, and resources, and positions, and employment, etc. And there's got to be spiritual progress. And Malcolm says both of those things have to go together. Right? This is very interesting. You know that verse, "Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana," "Oh Allah, give us the best in this life," right? And the best where? In the afterlife. So he writes, he says, as a community, he says, we have to actively cultivate both, right? And he says that we'll never do that until we truly believe as a community that the answer to all of our problems is found in the repertoire of Islam. Like you can find it there. Yeah. Wait.
Were a lot of these notions present in like the years or in his entries before, like even his time at Hajj?
Yeah.
Or, like with scholars, like, did these ideas naturally occur to him and were kind of intuitive in that sense?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, because he pollinated from different sources around the world. So my sense is that he derived a lot of different teachings from the people that he came in, the teachers and the visionaries that he came in contact with abroad. And I think what he took from those encounters, those multiple encounters, I would say hundreds of encounters, is that he thought deeply in his journeys about which ones were the most appropriate for the American context, given the context, where, given the time that he was in, but also thinking about where the community was going to move to in the future and how to get them there. Like, what are the things what are the principles that we have to work on first to get us to where we need to be? So he was thinking like fundamental principles, like the importance of the intention and the prayer. These are basic fundamental things. And then grand things like, reforming educational systems. And then all things like this, for example, making sure that, we cultivate on both fronts. He saw that the Nation of Islam's, one of its greatest detriments was that it had nothing to do with spirituality. Right? It left all of its followers with this sort of material aspect, extra worldly system, but it had nothing to do with cultivating, what we call iman and spiritual development and spiritual cultivation, right? And he says, you can't do this unless you accept the idea that all your answers are found in Islam, right? He said, that's the way it is. Right? You have to accept that notion. That was Malcolm's view. So, with these 7 notions, his grand plan, his vision to transform Islam in America was this. And he wrote about it, and he did it. But it was aborted. So he said this is done through 2 organizations. Remember, the last thing he comments on in his diary is that you need 2 fronts. A front, like there's a material and a spiritual front. And so because of that, he establishes 2 organizations. And he basically says, like, this is how things need to go. An organization to tackle the spiritual front, and that's a mosque. And an organization to tackle the material front, and that was a non-religious organization. And he thought the fact that it was non-religious was really important. Let's go over each one of those 2, and then we'll open up for more discussions. For the mosque, he thought the mosque should be done in a very different way. I say different because here we are 60 years later. But he envisioned a mosque in a way that's different from the way kind of that we have it today. So in some ways similar, some ways different. One, he said the mosque would be the center of where Islam should be taught. He does not envision a mosque as a place just for rituals. Right? He did not think of a mosque limited in that. There's some mosques that are like mega mosques. I used to live in Dallas. My wife and I used to live in, before I moved to North Dallas, I'd never seen a mega mosque. Like I'd never seen a mosque with a basketball court, right? Inside of it. I've never seen a mosque. I mean, it's unbelievable what you'll find in some mega mosques, right? Beautiful experiences, right? So now our ideas of mosques have evolved. And you also have mosques that are just, smaller mosques that are just like the 5 daily prayer mosques. Like, that's it. Right? That's it. That's what you expect, and that's okay. So we have different kinds. Malcolm thought that the mosque is the place where people go to learn about Islam. Very interesting. Right? Yes, prayer happened there, but the reason prayer happens in the mosque was because it was a part of learning about Islam. Right? Yes, rituals happen there, but they happen there because these were the vehicles. Like, there was action that happens after the prayer. So like in the black community, for example, like after the prayer, and not only in the black community, you see this in other communities nowadays, after prayer somebody gives a khatira, right? Or somebody gives a little talk or something. Like, the prayer is associated as this vehicle where Islam is taught. He thought that the mosques would all be centered in the inner cities, and that is the early history of Islam in America. Well, that's the history of Islam in America from this period up until the mid-90s, or the early 90s actually. That the mosques were, this is a replication of the Nation of Islam, that you put places of worship in areas where your community is the most vulnerable and there's the most need. And so he thought that mosques should be first and foremost situated in these places. And the mosque is also the place to remove distorted beliefs about Islam and teach people about practice, right? He thought the black communities were the most fertile ground for the work. Why did he think so? It's because he felt that again, he needed to repair the damage that he had done in distorting and propagating the message of the nation, so he thought that was the most fertile place to do it. And he literally says, the task or the objective of the Muslim mosque and anything like it is to teach our people a better way of life. Very interesting. That's what he says. Teach our people a better way of life. And so this is his sort of model for the Muslim Mosque, Inc. The Muslim Mosque, Inc. exists still today. It's no longer called Muslim Mosque, Inc. Does anybody know what it's called today? It's in New York City, by the way. Anybody know where? It's in Harlem. Right? If you go to Harlem, look up a mosque that's called the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood. That's the name of it, right? The Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood. And so you can go there, you can make your salat. That's the masjid that Malcolm established, right? It's like one of the most international, like you go there, there's people praying from everywhere, right? Everywhere around the world. Like, this is amazing, right? So Imam Talib Abdur-Rashid is the imam there, really older African-American brother, like he knows he knows where the bodies are buried, like he knows the history, and it caters to the community it's running today, right? Then Malcolm said you can't just have a space for people to learn about Islam, you have to have operational spaces, right? So the mosque he did not envision as a space where people operated beyond just giving them deep understanding about what it means to be Muslim and inspiring them to have a better life and work. That the mosque was basically a place where people came, they got their spiritual multivitamins, they got their Islamic steroid boost, right? And they went out to work. The other institution, you needed another institution where people developed sort of worldly skills and developed different tools to operate in the world also. So the mosque was a spiritual place, but you needed another place. And he called that the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Again, he focused on black unity here, not to emphasize race, but he really thought that the problem, first of all, the target of many of the problems in his time were the need for civil rights for black Americans. And he felt that if unity was achieved here, that they could form a large enough bloc to repel racism and discrimination in the United States. And when he talks about Afro-American unity, he's not only talking about African Americans in the United States, he's talking about like globally, black people being unified globally. It's very ambitious, transnational. So it's along these lines that he wants to focus first of all on the communities that he felt he did damage to internally, and then connect them to black communities in the Muslim world that he felt would be sources of inspiration. So he also, one thing I didn't talk about was in his diary, he talks about one of the problems of the community is that the contributions of the Islamic civilization abroad are cut, like our Muslim community, the black Muslims in the United States were cut off from learning about it, understanding and seeing what he saw globally when he traveled abroad and saw things that inspired him in terms of the diversity and the beauty and the sophistication of the Muslim world, their wonderful ideas, and learning a little bit about Islamic culture and history in Africa and other parts of the Middle East, parts of the Muslim world. So he felt like the disconnect there also did damage. It didn't inspire black people here, right? It didn't give them a vision to help them understand not only the beauty of Islam, but the depth and the breadth of Islam, to inspire them to do beautiful things. So he wanted to create this unity globally. He felt that there also needed to be a secular institution, what we call secular. He said basically like a non-religious institution that could create partnerships and partnerships with anybody who wanted to be a part of the vision, anybody, regardless of faith affiliation, regardless of anything, financial status, whatever. If you wanted to be on board, you were welcome. Non-religious, non-aligned. And the goal of that was to unite all people of color, regardless of faith affiliation. The objective was to fight racism. This is very important about what Malcolm's idea about Islam in America is that he felt he diagnosed the singular problem in the United States as a problem of color and racism. And he felt that all of the evils in terms of economic, political, and social evils in the United States stem from that. And the organization that he built, its objective was to work to gain complete respect and recognition as human beings for Black Americans. And this is what he wrote. This is not my words. This is what he wrote: recognition and respect as human beings. Very interesting. The organization had 5 purposes. This is at the bottom here. Restoration, to restore relationships with people of color in the United States, restore their relationship with people of color outside the United States. Right? It'd be very interesting to see if he lived today in our world of social media and digital connectivity, how he would use that, right? How he would talk about the importance of keeping that. Reorientations, develop allies abroad, and develop a deep concern with the plight and affairs and relationship with people around the world. He writes about this. Education, he writes, we have to liberate the mind through the learning of this is what he says, other philosophies, other cultures, other languages, other concepts, and ideas that are not rooted in that of colonization. That's literally what he said. And he says we have to scrutinize what's in textbooks. We have to scrutinize what's taught to our children. We have to scrutinize what's taught even in our child care centers. And we have to establish, he says, our own child care centers and our own textbooks, he says, and our own educational systems in order to basically, he doesn't use this like this, I was going to say to combat the ideas, but to teach our generation, the next generation, different ideas. He talks a lot also about developing skills in trade and economic security such that the Muslim community develops a type of independence from being and a type of self-reliance in the United States. And this was worked on a lot later. And then self-defense, as you know. Malcolm never lost his commitment to self-defense. He said, you basically, like, you cannot, this is Malcolm, you cannot rely on the police to protect you. You cannot rely on anybody else. And he says, if you rely on anybody else to protect you, you're a fool. Your Muslim community has to develop mechanisms to protect itself. He does not say what those mechanisms are or should be. He talks broadly about this. He does not say the Muslim community should do this or should do that. He doesn't talk specifics in the diary in his speeches, but he does talk very sharply about the importance of self-defense and self-protection. Yeah?
On the point of there being 2 separate institutions, one being the masjid and one being completely non-secular one.
Yeah.
The fact that it's non-secular, completely non-secular, makes me wonder, completely secular, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Completely secular, makes me wonder how much of a connection was there between both institutions if, like...
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think, because I feel like there's a lot of merit in connecting a masjid to that other institution, but the fact that that's completely secular, I'm just wondering if there's any connection between those two and what he envisioned.
It's a really good question because a lot of large masjids today are like both in one. But when I say both in one, you do find a lot of masajid that also have like nonprofit, like food banks, for example, and they have really good relationship with the local mayor and the local fire department and police chief and city council and the local education. Like they have these, what we call secular relationships, and they have connections to church, like the reverend, like, interfaith connections to other interfaith institutions. You do get the sense from Malcolm's from his work and his speech, you do get the sense that in his mind, at the time, he envisioned those things to be separate, not one. Yes. He envisioned those to be completely separate, the people leading them to be completely separate, but the community uses both. Like from a communal point of view, from a patron point of view, from a community point of view, you're going to both. But those two are not connected, at least that's the sense you get from his reading. He doesn't say they should not be, but you definitely get the sense that these are two different institutions with completely different missions. One sort of internally focused, one sort of externally focused, and they're targeting different things in the community, and they operate differently. But the community pollinates from both flowers, but they're different gardens.
Was there a mechanism to direct that polluting, or was it just like we're gonna?
Well, he would say the community would go to both, right? And so he was, after he was assassinated, his sister Ella Collins, and his wife were at odds about who's going to manage this institution, because they both thought, both his widow, Dr. Betty Shabazz, and his sister Ella Collins, who was here, they had different ideas about who should manage and how it should go. But there was no debate over the mosque, right? And so there was an element that, and it ended up that his sister, went to take the reins on this, but there was no, when she passed, there was nobody to take it on after her, and it fizzles and it dies out. But there's no clear indication that he envisioned that those two would be working together actively. At the same time, he never writes about the fact that he does, that they shouldn't either. But it's just clear that there's a big separation. So it's still a question that remains with, unfortunately, no concrete answer. We're living in a time where that's certainly not the case, right? But it's just an interesting aspect of history that we're talking about here. Yeah. I think the last thing, this is the last slide. So on social justice, he thought, and he's clear about this, very interesting, American Muslims should be independent. He writes against Muslims being affiliated with a particular political party. He actually says that. Muslims should not be affiliated with any party. So Malcolm would be against a Muslim Democrat or a Muslim Republican. He says literally Muslims have to be politically independent to get their agenda passed. And he says in his writings that Muslims have to vote on issues, not candidates. I don't know how that works, but that's his view. That's his view. That we are issues community. And he says when it comes to the involvement in politics in our community, he outlines stages. Here he does an interesting job he's thought deeply about this. And he has a very systematic view about how to incorporate the community in America into politics. He says, the first thing he says is our community has to develop literacy around issues. He says, if our community does not develop literacy around issues, they should not be in politics. He's clear about that. What are you talking about? What's the issue? What's the details around? Is it housing? Is it affordability? Is it this? Is it that? What's the issue? And if you want to get involved, develop deep literacy about that issue and the communal realities related to that issue, the politicians that are trying to deal with that issue, and the process that have hampered that issue and prevented it from being what it should be, and the process that, what are the ways to make it happen. So this is the first thing, literacy. This is what he writes about. He's very clear about this. Then he says, devote your energies, all your political energies, to removing injustice. So for Malcolm, involvement and engagement in politics is completely about one thing, removal of injustice. That's it. That's the agenda for the Muslim American politician who's not a Democrat or a Republican, who's an independent. That's the platform. Wherever you see injustice, that's where you target. And so he says, all voting from the community, he writes about this, all lobbying, he said, has to be directed to achieving that outcome in 3 areas. Local efforts to remove injustice, national efforts to remove injustice, and international efforts to remove injustice. He said, basically, that's the agenda, the platform for an American Muslim involved in politics. He alludes to the fact that if you're not doing that, you're bought and sold, basically, right? If that's the American Muslim platform. Then he says, as part of that agenda, and he speaks about this, he's spoken about it at Harvard before he was assassinated. He writes about this as well. It becomes part of his agenda. He says the American Muslim politician has to champion human rights over civil rights, and I teach this in my class. Dr. King was known for championing civil rights. And as you know, the civil rights movement became the dominant platform here in the United States. While Dr. King was championing civil rights, Malcolm was also engaged in dialogue with Coretta Scott King, his wife, about how civil rights was a problem, actually, in the United States. And that the problem of civil rights, according to Malcolm, was that civil rights caters to the needs of the middle class. It totally neglects the needs of the working class and those impoverished. Those that are in poverty on the bottom, that are beneath the middle class, for Malcolm, they don't get their rights because civil rights only emerge for people that vote and the people that pay taxes. And their agenda starts with civil rights and moves up. It can go down, but it goes down slowly, not fast enough. That was Malcolm's critique. That civil rights can be of benefit to the working class and to those impoverished, but it's too slow. He says the analogy of the problem of somebody who's in the working class, he said the analogy is somebody who's sitting on the stove. He said, people always look at black people, he said, and they're wondering why they're jumping and hollering and screaming. And he says, all this hoopla, they're wondering why this, anger and frustration and stuff. He said, but they don't realize that the whole time, black people have been sitting on the stove. And what happens when you're sitting on the stove? Things are burning, it's hot. He said, they're not sitting on the middle class, they're not sitting on the stove. So their behinds aren't burning. So they're looking at you wondering, why is he jumping around? Why is he all, animated and upset and everything? He said, but they're not sitting on the stove. He says, homelessness, black people sitting on the stove. Unemployment, black people sitting on the stove. Discrimination, black people sitting on the stove. Lynching, black people sitting on the stove. So he says, civil rights might meet this needs, but it will meet the needs slowly and it won't capture everybody, which we have seen in over 50 years. The civil rights movement still has left out a plethora of people in this country. I mean, you don't believe me? Look at the 42 million people that just got their SNAP benefits cut off, though we have a robust civil rights establishment here in the United States, right? Right? So Malcolm said, you don't get there through civil rights, and if you get there, it'll take so long, your entire community will just be stuck sitting on the stove. He said, you get there, you get rights for everybody by human rights. So he said the American Muslim politician has to be basically different. The American Muslim politician can't champion civil rights. He said because it's not for everybody, it's not universal. They've got to champion human rights. And he said you prioritize the needs of the working class over the middle class because the needs are greater. Very interesting. Black people sitting on the stove, right? Today it's not just black people sitting on the stove, it's all kind of people sitting on the stove. So he said, the other problem with civil rights is that it does not humanize people. Interesting. He critiqued this. He told Dr. King's wife, Coretta Scott King, my grandmother actually went to high school with, right? He said, the problem with civil rights is that it doesn't humanize people. From civil rights, you don't get the idea that a person is human. You cater to their needs based upon the fact that they pay taxes. So the humanization of them is economic, based upon benefit, not based upon reality. Very astute assessment by Malcolm. He says, if you want to humanize people, you only do it through human rights, right? And so this was his legacy. One of the greatest, I cried when I was reading some of this stuff. I cried a little bit because I felt how did we miss this as a community? Do I'm 50 years old. I was born in 1975, right? you know, Malcolm was killed in 1965. We're talking 60 years since his assassination. Every time I teach this stuff, and no matter the context, not one Muslim has ever heard of this, right? Not one. And I feel it's like criminal. Not criminal, but I feel it's like really sad. Like, this is stuff like we missed. Part of his assassination was not just killing a man and killing ideas, but also killing, like, you know, seeds that were supposed to germinate from our community, for our community as well. And we made great contributions in terms of Islam in America. Our parents, our ancestors have done tremendous work here. But there's a difference between building a masjid, for example, which, you know, there's no doubt there's benefits there. But there's a difference between that and having a vision for a people in your country. And a lot of times we have a lot of folks in leadership positions, but having a vision is very different. And having a program, it may not be the right program. You can debate about whether this is right or wrong, but it's something to talk about. And that was my hope for, like, writing a book on this. And in this book, my question was, how did he not only transform Islam in America, but then, like, what happened afterwards? How did that get lost? But then also, how did it get preserved? Because there was an element of the way it was preserved with the rise of certain leaders in the African-American Muslim community. 99% of them have been murdered and killed or died off. And there's one that's living, right, who's in a federal max penitentiary now, dying in Colorado of cancer, who'll never get out. Allahu Alam, Imam Jamil. So this, I just wanted to, I thought, you know, Jazakallah khair Mu'in for giving us an opportunity to share this, inshallah. This is sort of I'm coming, Omar. This is sort of how, you know, Malcolm tried to transform Islam in America. He had an agenda. He had a program. We don't say this is the best program, this is like what we all should be doing, and this is it, khalas, Islam in America. The way Islam should be is like stamp certified and everybody's got to follow it. No. But it's a program and it's a platform. And we see traces of these things, right? We see the success, you know, of Mamdani, for example. We see the success of Muslims in different atmospheres, in different contexts, who are trying to bring back the discourse on human rights, who are trying to really pioneer this a legacy of work in communities in a wise way, who are trying to build alliances and things of that nature to educate and to raise awareness with our community of the needs that are there and to try to fill those gaps. So how did Malcolm transform Islam in America? Well, he gave it a vision when it didn't have one. It may not, you know, whether it's the right vision or not was not discussed at the time. We can discuss it today. But I hope that we discuss it and think about it and use it at least as fodder to try to develop our own ideas and to have conversations about the bright path ahead in the right direction, inshallah. Omar.
Thank you, Sheikh, for your reflections. I really appreciate it. You actually set up my question really nicely when you brought up Mamdani, because I was going to say basically that, like, obviously, I would venture to say that Malcolm actually would be pleased with, like, the progress Muslims are making in politics, especially this week, but no candidate is perfect. And, if you look at someone like Mamdani, obviously there's a lot of questions that he probably has had to ask himself in terms of, like, specifically I wanted to ask you about, like, LGBTQ plus advocacy, because he's been pretty vocal in support of that. So I wanted to ask you, you can feel free to take it from two angles, like either from kind of the Malcolm X philosophy worldview, like what would kind of be his guidance there, and then what is our obligation as Muslims as we're navigating like a bit of a tough topic like that could sacrifice like your political success, but also could be at odds with your.
That's a great question. I think to summarize it really quickly is here. What does he say? Where is it? Here. So Malcolm would be big, like he would say, on this side, like the Organization of Afro-American Unity, like the non-religious institution side. You know, you work with everybody for human rights, right? You work with everybody. If you want to establish partnerships and relationships with different groups of people, if you're working towards a common cause, then that's one thing. But then he was very clear that as a community, you would never compromise your values. As a community, you would never compromise your values. So you would say, you would find questions about a variety of social movements, political movements, economic movements. You would say, within, he said he was very clear that, the American Muslim is the one who understands that the source of all of our spiritual and religious truth is in Islam. And we have to be willing to ask the question and then go to that source. And whatever that source says, that's our position, right? And so our position is our moral compass. So if you build alliances with different people who have a different moral compass, if you're able to keep your teachings and not compromise, then you can work in that space. If you have to compromise, then you're not ready. And that's also Malcolm's view, which is why he also, where is it? Here. That one, the first one. The idea of developing literacy around issues. One of the things that he talks about is readiness. Everybody's not ready for the political process, which means everybody's not strong enough to be a part of alliances that may end up putting them in a position where they compromise their values based on the interest of, I'll compromise because I'm trying to achieve this goal. Malcolm was never one to compromise, and he was never one to accept it. So the idea is that's why he wanted two institutions: the mosque, right, to strengthen that anchor, keep that moral compass strong, and then the secular institution where you're working in the world, and you shouldn't feel weak there because you've got that first institution. Problem is, we've got folks who work on the other level, on that side, but never engage on the other side. They work on one side, never engage on the other, on both sides, right? On both sides. So we have to be literate, and we have to develop both muscles in that sense. Does that make sense? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheikh, for sharing this. I'm very curious of what happened after Malcolm's death, right?
Yeah.
Islam slowly come to the background of public discourse, especially in black and racial relations.
Uh-huh.
Islam surfaced again after 9/11, right? I think there's
Yeah.
a dip there, and then we talk about now, for example, there are black authors like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Isabel Wilkerson. It's not Islam that is in the center of the idea.
Right.
What happens there? Even NOI still have adherence, right? With Louis Farrakhan and etc. What happened and
you know about Louis Farrakhan. That's good. Look, the reality and the evidence and the history is clear. From the death of Malcolm until 9/11, Islam was in the public sphere and Muslims, heavily so. After 9/11, to be honest with you, you could track it to after 1996, which is when Hollywood started making movies about the Arab terrorists and started hiring, top-class Hollywood actors in the movies, So after 1996, 97, but certainly after 9/11, Muslims became in the public sphere. And Islam was there, but it was in the background because Islam was misused and abused. And what rose was Islamophobia, and so you had Muslims combating and dealing with Islamophobia. But in the public sphere, it's before 9/11, up until from 65 to certainly 95, for 30 years, Islam was heavily in the public sphere. And there was no backlash to Islam being in the public sphere. It was in the public sphere in art, in music, in politics, in community work, in interfaith work, in international engagement. It was all over the place, from athletes, in media, in the newspaper. I mean, the idea of terror, the terrorists and Islam even Islam being associated as a foreign thing was not there before 9/11. Islam being like a foreign threat emerged after 9/11. Actually, the argument I make in my book is the fact that what Malcolm did was he put the last sort of brick in the structure of indigenizing Islam in America. The indigenization of Islam, when we think about indigenization, we think of lamb, but not for religion. There's a phenomenon called the indigenized religion, where it looks at the practice of the people in the land, regardless of whether or not they were originally there or not, but how the growth, how that religious practice or spiritual practice becomes a long history, part of the long history of a people in that land, and it shapes the land in different ways. It shapes the geography, it shapes the history. So Islam went through that from Native American tribes. There's a tribe from the Iroquois Confederacy that were all Muslim, Native Americans. Part of a Cherokee tribe that were Muslim because they engaged with West Africans. Then black slaves. Then you have all this legacy. You have geographies in the United States that were transformed because of Muslims. Right? I mean, Route 66 is one. There's 12 cities that are named Medina and 7 that are named Mecca. These are cities in the United States. There's a city that's named Abdul Qadir, from Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, the Sufi. Right? There's a city that's called that. So you've had geographical changes in the United States. You've got cultural changes. I teach about this, the entire Mormon community. You ever heard of the Mormons? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? The entire Mormon community were deemed Muslim back in the 1860s and 1850s. They were all thought, like the government and the New York Times thought the entire Mormon community were Muslims. I'm serious. They thought that their community was like an Oriental Khilafah. They thought, the head of the Mormon church was the new Muhammad, and he called himself Muhammad. So we have incredible, weird, wonderful and weird history of Islam. And so there's this process of Islam being rooted here. What Malcolm did is he was the last piece of that puzzle because his contribution was so powerful that this communal conversion, the entire African American community, converts to Islam, but not in the religious sense, in the cultural sense. So you have black folks in the South and in the Northeast saying Assalamu alaikum, and they're not Muslim, right? Who know what bean pie, not that bean pie is a part of Islam, but there's cultural aspects to it. Rap artists, that use Islam, from Queen Latifah to Cardi B, right? I mean, they all use these things. Why? Because it resonates. It's authentic. So that's Malcolm's permanent contribution, which is there until 9/11. In 9/11, all of that is erased. There's a concerted effort to de-indigenize Islam in the United States, right? And we are still in that era, and we think one of the consequences of Mamdani's election is that's going to reemerge. You watch and see. It's already started, right? Yeah. So we're still in this process, right? Yeah. One more question, then we have to stop. No question? No, nothing from the sister side? We haven't heard anything. I know we got some here, but no? Okay. Yes.
At the end of Malcolm's life, when he was receiving law of express from the Nation of Islam,
yeah.
Do you think at that moment he was ready to martyr himself without realizing his full vision?
Certainly he felt that he was going to die. That's for sure. And I think that, there was certainly a point where he became more concerned about his own safety and the safety of his family, but it never deterred him from his mission. When he was assassinated, the day he was assassinated, he was scheduled to be speaking more about this organization and to talk more about it. And so unfortunately he was taken. So he remained on mission, but he knew that he had a feeling for sure he was going to die at any moment. Very, very interesting.
You think it came from his personal guilt, like you said at the beginning, he felt very responsible for the disfiguration of Islam in America due to his affiliation with the nation?
Malcolm, as we understand it, became a very spiritual man too. And I think the guilt in the beginning motivated him, but I think in the end he was a very spiritual man, and he saw that his end was there. It's an interesting phenomenon. I'll end on this note, where the person who's deeply connected to God, deeply close to God, can sense when their appointment is nigh, right? When their appointment is drawing near, they can sense it. And so they start, to develop a certain orientation towards the next day and the next day. They know that their time is running out. They still move. Externally, they're still moving. They're still, externally they're with people. Internally, there's a transformation going on, and Allah knows best. So, Muin, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Chaplain Khalil, for the amazing talk. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. Inshallah, the recording of this lecture will be posted online if you guys want to go back and review anything. And also, we have a bunch of copies of the chaplain's book right here for the taking. Because we have many visitors who are not just Harvard students, although a majority are Harvard students, please, if you are not at Harvard, come as our visitors, take a book. Because inshallah, for those of us who go here, his books will be in the musalla, free for taking, whatever, inshallah.
Yeah. So even those that are Harvard, so you can always get a free copy here. If it's not here, just come, as you come, you'll see more copies here, inshallah ta'ala. So we want to, and if there's some left over, those that have not gotten a book, take some as well. There's a couple copies there, though.
Yeah.
So,
and this is a weekly halaqah, so next Thursday, there'll be, inshallah, more topics to discuss, more things that are hopefully curious, interesting, and engaging for everybody here about what it means to be Muslim, what are some very relevant issues in Islam for colleges, for people in the university system, and for Americans today. Jazakallah khair, wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh yes,
tomorrow we'll be talking about different topics, Islamic ethics. We'll be talking about Islamic from 5 to 6.
Yes. So, all right, thank you guys so much.
So if you are guests, when I say guests, non-Harvard student from MIT, Tufts, or wherever, come get your complimentary copy. If there's some left over, those that haven't gotten a copy from Harvard, come get a copy. And if not, you can always get some as we post them on the table from week to week, inshallah. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.